Hello and welcome to Sounds Heal Podcast. I am your host, Natalie Brown, and thank you so much for joining me as we continue to explore the fields of sound healing, sound therapy, and generally the use of sound for health and wellness. Today, I am thrilled to share a conversation with Yuval Ron, a composer, musician, and researcher whose work bridges sacred sound traditions, neuroscience, and healing. In our conversation, we explore how Yuval has immersed himself in the sacred sound traditions of the world, uncovering the universal building blocks of music across cultures, as well as regional differences, often based on the language and the landscape of the area. Through collaborations with neuroscientists, researchers, doctors, shamans, he bridges ancient wisdom with modern science, illuminating how sound influences the brain and facilitates healing. We also discuss the profound role of sacred sound, the inspiration behind the upcoming Healing Sounds of the Abrahamic Faiths program, and why voice and breath are central to the practice, and how important practice is to embody the sound work. If you are interested in the program that we discuss, the University of Sufism is presenting the Healing Sounds of Abrahamic Faiths program with Yuval and other renowned teachers. You can check out sufiuniversity.org, and I'll also include more information in the description or show notes wherever you're tuning in. Please enjoy this episode with Yuval Ron. This podcast is sponsored by the Om Shop and Spa, located in Sarasota, Florida, or online at theomshop.com. The Om Shop has North America's largest showroom of vibrational tools, custom instruments, and if you're looking to up-level your sound healing vibrational tools, they are the place for you. They're very helpful if you're looking for something specific as well. And if you're able to make it there in person, they have a luxury spa too. So thank you to the Om Shop for their support and sponsorship. Welcome in, Yuval Ron. I am so excited to have you on the podcast. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Natalie. Good to be with you.
Thank you. Let's begin. We are going to talk about this special program that's been put together by the University of Sufism, but why don't we get to know you a little bit first? What led you to the path of sacred sound and healing, and how has your understanding evolved over time?
Yes. Very early on in my career, right when I graduated from music school in Boston, I went to Berklee College of Music back in the 80s, and I studied film scoring. So my focus was on composing music for films, and I had background in composing music for theater and dance before going to music school. And then I learned how to score films and TV in school, and I started working in that field. And about a year after I graduated, I saw an ad by somebody from completely different field, and that was my entry into the healing sound world. And that person who put the ad was no other than one of the greatest researcher of sound and the brain and hemisync sound and binaural beats and all that, and that was Robert Monroe. And he was looking for composers who would compose music for the special scheme of low binaural beats, which I don't know if the listeners are familiar with that, but it's sound that you barely hear. It's very, very low. It's almost subliminal. And it's manipulate the brain waves to slow down or change to where the researchers want the brain to go to. And so you could direct the brain to go to the mode of sleep or the mode of creativity or to a mode of meditation or mode of focus. And even to a mode of intuitive and spiritual alignment. So Robert Monroe was the most outstanding researcher in the field, and he's created the Monroe Institute. And I got to work with him directly, personally. He would call me. This was 1991. This was before internet, before cell phone. It was just a regular landline. And he would call me from Virginia. I was in Boston, and I would hear this low tone with Southern accent, a real gentleman with a real presence. And he would talk to me over the phone and tell me how binaural beats can change the wave of the brain. And he told me how to structure the music according to what he structured with those binaural beats. So I had to create the music exactly for the journey that he wanted to fit with the journey of the binaural beats that were subliminal and manipulating the brain to therapeutic use. And that was my first experience working with scientists and researchers and using music to heal. And that was, one project. And I went on to work as a film composer. And I worked for film composers since then. I'm scoring a film right now, actually 2 films right now in production in my studio. So when I work on film music, I use something that I studied back in Berklee College of Music, which is a science called psychoacoustics. It's the science of why our brain interprets certain sounds the way human interpret. Why when we hear a very low sound, very slow, doom, 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 and then it speeds up, doom, 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 doom. Why does that create fear? Why? That's just sound. Why all human beings, regardless of culture, regardless of where they grew up, why our brain interpret particular sounds, intervals? It's not just rhythms. It's also high notes, low notes, musical chords, musical modes, music that goes up rapidly, music that goes down rapidly. Everything is interpreted by the human brain in a certain psychological terms that invoke feelings, emotions, and thoughts in us. That is called psychoacoustics. So when I write music for films and the director wants me to create fear in the audience, he wants the audience to be really on the edge of their seats at a certain point. I need to use what I learned in psychoacoustics. So that's what I've been doing for many, many years, scoring music for film and TV. But about 15 years ago, I had a wonderful encounter with a neuroscientist named Mark Robert Waldman, who wrote the book, How God Changes Your Brain. How God Changes Your Brain. And it's all about spiritual practices, prayers, chanting that changes the brain. Meditation, prayer, from all kinds of religious and spiritual traditions. And they even checked atheists, people who don't believe in God, people who don't have any religion. It's a very interesting book. And I met him, and he was very interested in my work. And he invited me to collaborate with him and his colleagues. And he invited me also to write a curriculum with him for Esalen Institute. And so we started teaching in Esalen together about how sacred sound, which I researched for many, many, many years because of my own personal interest in sacred sound and devotional sounds from all kinds of religions from around the world. And I became an expert in world music and in sacred music from the Jewish tradition, the Christian tradition, the Sufi, Islamic traditions, and African traditions, and Indian traditions, and Armenian traditions, and many, many traditions of sacred music. And Mark, the scientist, was interested to show people that regardless of your religious tradition or spiritual tradition, if you really believe If you really focus, if you're really into what you're practicing, if you're really mindful and you focus completely on that, the processes that are happening in the brains are the same. And he was interested in what I was doing because he thought that my teaching about the different sacred traditions, the sacred traditions of the Jews, the sacred traditions of the Muslims, the sacred traditions of the early Christians from the Middle East, Middle Eastern Christians, I show through my musical research that the building blocks, the musical modes that these people are using are the same. And so the neuroscientists were very interested in that because their research show that neurologically the process is the same. And I'm showing musically that the musical building blocks, the musical modes that are being used for different traditions, for different occasions. For example, for a circumcision ritual, what musical mode you would use. For wedding, what would you use? For praise song, what would you use? Which musical mode? So the musical tools across the different particular region, if it's the Middle East, it doesn't matter if you're Jewish, Muslim, or Christian. If you from the Middle East, you use the same musical modes. The same thing in India. Christians in India use the same ragas, same musical modes as the Hindu and the Muslims in India. So I started teaching and working with neuroscientists about 15 years ago. And that was a really nice closing of a circle because in the very, very beginning of my career, just coming out of school, I worked with this great researcher about the brain and the music with Robert Monroe. And now I start again working with top-notch neuroscientists that are, the cutting edge in their field in spirituality and the mind. And that led me to work with doctors and shamans and Ayurvedic doctors and Chinese doctors and all kinds of geriatric doctors, people who work with patients that suffer from dementia and Alzheimer and all kinds of even performance enhancer coaches. And all those people are interested to work with me on creating music that would facilitate what they are trying to do and enforce what they are trying to do to help their patients get better and do better. And so for me, this path of working with film directors and working with theater directors and working with choreographers and working with actors, for me, as a composer, it's the same. They are telling me what they want to invoke in the patient. They tell me what they want the people to feel. And my job is to find the musical tools. That's my expertise. They don't know how to do it musically. They know how to do it with drugs or with herbs or with acupuncture, or, but they want me to do it with sound because they believe that sound is very powerful. And sound has no side effects usually, most of the time. It's non-invasive. Anybody can do it at home. It's very, 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 very inexpensive, very accessible. Some of the things is just with your breath. You work with your breath and with your own voice. You don't need anything else. You can do it anywhere, anytime. Anybody can do it. You don't need to be a musician. Any age group can do it. It's a wonderful tool. And so doctors and healers are increasingly interested in that. And I'll tell you last thing in this answer, neuroscientists are confirming now that these practices really impact the brain, really impact the well-being and the health. So neuroscientists are interested in it because they see it's not a myth, it's not an illusion, it's not psychological, it's really physiological what's going on with sound and the human body and the mind. So I get a lot of interest from all quarters, from the yogis to the Ayurvedic doctors, the Chinese doctors, the Qigong practitioners, the chiropractors, the neuroscientists. Everybody are interested to work with me on those projects. and it's a wonderful time. I can tell you that when Robert Monroe worked with me in 1990, 25 years ago, more than 20, 35 years ago. 35 years ago, he was like a lonely voice in the desert. 35 years ago, he was one. He was the researcher. Now, 35 years later, almost every large university has a study on, sound and mindfulness, and that's wonderful. That's very, very good.
Yeah, that's right. It's almost like the science and the research is catching up. And it's wonderful to hear about the people that are coming to you, as well as, all these different cultures and modalities and things that you've looked into, show the interconnectedness of it all as well. So I wonder, this is a pretty big question, and you started to explore it. With these different traditions, Islam, Christianity, Judaism, they each approach sacred sound. Can you explain a little bit about what that means and maybe some of the universal things that you're noticing, as well as things that might separate the different traditions?
Yeah, that's interesting. So, starting with my upbringing, I grew up. I was born and raised in Israel, and so I grew up right in the heart of the Middle East, and hearing Jewish music from the Middle East, Armenian music, Arabic music, chanting from the mosques, chanting from the churches. So that's where I grew up, and for me, it was all beautiful. I was attracted to that sacred sound, regardless if it came from the Armenian church in Jerusalem or the mosque in Jerusalem or the Jewish temple in Jerusalem. So for me, it was all magical and beautiful and attractive, and still is, because I feel the devotion, I feel the human heart yearning to the one that is beyond human, to something, the great mystery that we don't know what it is. Some people think they know, some people don't know, some people don't realize, some people are not aware that there's something bigger than a human being, that there can be forces that are larger or more ancient than humanity or nature. So that's okay. But I feel that there is that great mystery, the one below all reality. And we call it the reality, the one reality beyond the reality that we see. So I was always attracted to it for some reason. I didn't understand it, but as a kid, I wanted to hear it. I wanted to be near it. And so when I became a professional musician, I started researching these three traditions, the three Abrahamic traditions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, but not from Europe, not from Latin America or from Africa, but from the Middle East, because that's where I grew up, and that's where it's all originated. Christianity is not a European religion originally. Originally, it was born in Israel. Judaism was born in Israel. Islam was born in Saudi Arabia, just south of Israel. So I wanted to focus on that, and I've done a lot of research on that, and I found I was surprised. I was really surprised to find that these three traditions in the Middle East are using the same musical modes in the same way to invoke the same emotions for particular occasions. So I'll give you an example. There is a mode that is used for healing, but it's also used for yearning to connect with the source, yearning. And it's a love yearning. It's a musical mode that expresses love, but you're not with your lover. So it's you see, in the Middle East and in India, there are many musical modes that have different shades and different color and different combinations of intervals. And in the West, we don't have that. The West lost it. And I wrote a whole chapter in my book, Divine Attunement. I wrote a book called The Vanishing Modes. And that chapter, The Vanishing Modes, is basically a lecture that I give in music schools about why in the West, we have only two musical modes, major and minor. Major is happy, minor is sad. All the music that we listen to, everything, all the music of Mozart and Beethoven and the Beatles and jazz and rock and hip hop, everything that we hear is only two musical modes. That's a shock. I was shocked when I realized that. People don't realize it. When I give this lecture in music schools to young composers, they just can't believe that nobody told them that. Nobody is teaching it. That's why I wrote a chapter in my book, and I go to music school and I give lectures about it. The West lost it. It's not that we didn't have it. Back 1,000 years ago, in Europe, we still had the musical modes. They were called the church modes, and they came from the Greek modes. And the Greek, guess where the Greek are from? The Greek are from the Middle East. They're right next to Israel. So the musical modes of the Middle East came into Europe through Greeks, through the ancient Greeks, through the Romans, through the early Christians. But 1,000 years ago, they start slowly to disappear. Over 1,000 years, those musical modes slowly were dropped in Europe. And so the Americas, all based on the music that came from Europe, plus rhythmic elements that came from Africa and indigenous rhythms, but melodically, musically, harmonically, it's all European. And European is only two modes, happy and sad. You have two colors. You can either write a song, you can write, this kind of sad, but basically you have, let's say you want to write a song that you're very sad. It's really tragic. You have only one mode to write it in, minor. And let's say you want to write a song that you're just a little bit sad. You're kind of melancholic, but a little bit nostalgic. It's not really dark. Nobody died. You just think about a lover that you had in the past. You had a wonderful love affair and it ended. It broke your heart, but it was not meant to be. It was part of your path. And one day you think about it. You want to write a song about it. In the West, you write about in minor. And if you have a terrible tragedy and you want to write a song about it, you're also going to use the same musical mode, the minor. In the Middle East and in India, no. You have different musical modes for different kinds of sadness, for different kinds of emotion. And those musical modes are also used for healing, for different conditions. It's amazing. So the Abrahamic traditions in the Middle East, the Jews, the Sufis, the Muslims, and the Christians are using the same musical modes to express the same musical feelings. If they want to praise God and praise creation, they use particular musical mode. When they want to use a yearning love to the one reality, but you have that lover, you have that beloved. They called God or the source, the creator. In the Sufi tradition, you refer to it as the beloved. So you have the beloved, you have the one that you love. Because in the Sufi tradition, by the way, the Sufi tradition has something called the school of love, which means you describe everything, all your relationship with the one, with the source, with the creator, you describe it in terms of love affair, love relationship. So you're searching for your beloved. You feel that there is one and you love and you feel love to that one that gave you this life, but you can't find it. So you have love, but you can't unite with that love. It's difficult to feel the union. It's like you have a lover, you have a boyfriend or a girlfriend, and they went to Europe for a whole semester. They went abroad for a semester. So you have your love relationship, you talk on the phone, but you can't really be together physically. You cannot be in the same place for a whole semester. That is a particular special color of love. It's yearning and longing for your lover. There is a musical mode in the Middle East, particularly to express that special feeling of love. And the Sufis use that a lot. And guess what? The Jews, the Hasidic Jews, when they dance their ecstatic dances to unite with the One, for the same particular purpose, just like the Sufis, to unite with the One. The Hasidic Jews, guess what they use? They use the same musical mode that the Sufi Muslims are using for the same purpose. Now, did the Muslim copied it from the Jews? Did the Jews copied it from the... No. This is something that is cultural to the Middle East. It's predating the religions. And that's the beauty of it. It has to do with the land. It has to do with the earth. It has to do with the wind. It has to do with the water. It has to be with the quality of the elements in that particular region of the world. That is, the desert in the Middle East is not like the desert in America. The desert in Morocco, in North Africa, is not the same kind of desert that you have in Mongolia or in India. It's just different kind of desert. I've been there. I know what I'm talking about. I travel to those deserts. I can tell you the sound of the wind is different. The feeling of the sand is different. Everything is different. The air feels different. And it's the desert. It looks the same, but it's not the same. And there's different music. Different sounds come out of different sound of wind. Different way the wind hit the bamboo and the trees and the birds. The birds' calls are different. The birds are singing differently in different regions in the world. And so human being created different musical languages, different musical modes, and that has to do with the region and not with the religion, because the religions came later. Judaism and Islam and Christianity are relatively young religions, relatively. There were millions of years with human beings on that land before those religions. So those religions use the musical tools, the musical modes, the means of expression that was there. The first Christians were Jews. The first Muslims were pagans. So they didn't stop playing the musical instruments that they always had. They didn't stop using the musical modes that they always had. They just dedicated the music to different names, to different concepts, but it's the same musical notes. So I found that this is very, very fundamental and groundbreaking information and also unifying information. If we realize that we are using the same musical modes, that's something that unifies us. It reminds us that we are all human beings living in a particular land, and there's elements of the nature and elements of humanity before there's any religion. And so, and that those are the things that unify us. Religions a lot of times separates us, unfortunately. So it doesn't mean that religions are bad. It means that we need to be informed. We need, we need to practice our faith and our whatever spiritual path we choose. We need to remember that our brothers and sisters that are practicing other spiritual practices, they are all human beings. They are all one. They're all part of the creation. And the musical tools, the musical modes are all part of the creations. And I'll just say quickly something about what separates, what's different between, the Jewish tradition, Christian tradition, and Sufi tradition in the Middle East. There's very little, very little that is different. There's languages are a source of separation. Languages, if you don't know English, you wouldn't understand what I'm saying right now. So that's separation. If you can only understand German, that creates a barrier between our podcast and you need some kind of translation. Okay. So they're using different languages. Even if they use very similar languages, even if they use, Arabic and Hebrew are very similar, Aramaic, which is used by the Christians, Aramaic prayers, Aramaic and Hebrew and Arabic, they're all family. They're the same family of languages. There's many similar words, but still it's different languages. So that's separating them. There's few different occasions, but musically it's very similar. Um, uh, the differences are relates to names. You would call this cup of tea in 3 different names, but this is still a cup of tea. They're all drinking a cup of tea, but they're going to call it 3 different ways. So the differences are superficial. They belong to language and religious coding. But if the Muslims, before they go to prayer, they wash. There's a water washing ceremony. The Jews have a water ceremony before they eat, before they have specific sacred times that they have to use water to cleanse before. So the water is the same water, but these people were going to use it on this date. These people are going to use it on that date. You look at the Christian tradition; they use water for cleansing baptism. It's a big cleansing, purifying, and guess what? You do it with water, so you call it baptism. So you say, does Jews do baptism? You say, no, Jews don't do baptism. Does Christians do baptism? No, they don't do baptism. But if you really look at the tradition, they all use water for purification for particular times. You see what I mean? And that's the same in the music, the same in the sound and the musical modes. In the Middle East, if you go to Africa and you go to Europe, different musical modes, different sounds, used in similar ways, but it's already a different musical world. Okay, so that's what my research have found, and I find it really fascinating, and that's what I'm sharing with my students. The people who study with me, the courses, and what we're going to be teaching in the University of Sufism. The difference is that now, it's an interview. I can just touch on things. When we study, I bring songs and prayers, and we have to learn to chant it. We need to learn to embody those sacred traditions and learn how to use it for healing. So it's highly experiential. It's not a lecture. Right now in our interview, it's like a lecture. I'm sharing information, but the course is, there's a little bit of explanation and background, and then practice. The practice is the most important thing, because if you didn't understand or you didn't know about certain historical information about how this music came about, okay, so you don't know this piece of information. But if you learn to practice the sound, the chant, and you know how to use it, then you have a tool that can heal you, can heal others. If you learn the history, you listened really carefully to what I was telling about the historical context. And then while we were practicing, you were zoning out. You were not practicing. You were getting distracted. You didn't practice it. You didn't learn it. And then the week in between the lessons, you didn't practice that. So you know nothing. You know absolutely nothing. And that's what I tell my students. If you don't practice, you get zero. You get zero out of this whole thing. You can learn the history. You can learn the history in a book. So what? You can't heal yourself with information about historical context. You can just heal yourself, or you can affect your body and mind with sound vibration. And so you have to practice. It's like music. If you don't practice your violin, if you don't practice your piano, and you just talk about it, so you can be a music critic, you can talk about music, but you don't know how to make music. You get 0 out of the whole lessons because you didn't practice. This is really hard for people, Natalie. It's amazing. For some people, they're really passionate and they get this like fire. They can't stop practicing. It's like when I was a kid, that's how I practiced. I practiced music every day. I loved it. I couldn't help by playing music. And I still love music. It's my life. So it's passionate. It's passion. So some people have this passion, but many people who come to study, no matter what they study, they have a lot of distractions. They've got difficulties. They've got challenges and obstacles and difficulty focusing and just a lot of distractions. And so they don't get to practice. They don't practice. And I tell them, look, you have to practice. That's the most important thing. If you don't practice, you're not going to get anything. You're not going to feel it. It's not going to work. So that's the key. This program is experiential. It's not academic. It is academic as well as experiential. There's history, there's context, there's things you need to understand. There's philosophy. There's all kinds of medical concepts that we need to understand. There's mystical concepts and psychological concepts and physical concepts that we need to learn. But the bottom line is practicing. It's really making sound with your voice and your breath, and you don't need to be a singer. You need to be doing it. And then you really benefit. Then you receive. But it's work. It's absolutely work.
Yeah, that sounds like a wonderful mixture of the history and philosophy and those understandings and some science. But you're right, the practical, the experiential is the only way to become it, to really, be
To
one with
embody.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, I like the word embody.
Mm-hmm.
So I encourage there's a lot of so it's interesting. The studies about sound, healing sound, but there's a lot of simple movements involved. Because if you notice, when Sufis chanting, they sway, they tap they do all kinds of things with their body. You look at the Hasidic Jews, when they get ecstatic, they involve movement. There's a movement. Christianity is a little bit more difficult to see it, because it's, unless you go to a Baptist church, then you see the movement, and that's wonderful that it's alive in the Baptist church. In African American churches, you see the movement, but over almost 2,000 years in Europe, the European form of Christianity repressed anything that has to do with movement, because they're associated with the pagan past. So it's very hard to find the movements. But I encourage my students to use the movements, a very simple movement, as they do the sound, because I tell them, when you do that, you embody the sound more than if you work just from your throat up, your brain and your throat. That's all your work. Nothing below. Then it's going to be less memorable, less deep. So we want to involve the whole body in the work, and then it's embodiment of the sound. And because I work with neuroscientists, I know the studies that they shared with me, and it shows that if you embody sound, there's a lot more impact in the brain, a lot more activity in the brain. If you do it passively, there's still positive impact in the brain, but much less. So listening to music passively is very healthy. Listen to beautiful music is good for you. Surround yourself with harmonic, beautiful music that soothes your soul, and you're doing good service for you. But that's passive. It's good, but it's passive. And you get that, you do this much and you get this much. And this is scientific. It shows in the brain. Now, if you involve in making, in playing beautiful harmonic music that soothes your soul, you are making it. It's a lot more work. You put in this much of work now. And guess what? According to neuroscience, this is what you get back. You're getting this much benefits. So it's beautiful. It's scientific. It's proven. And so we tell people, look, you're exhausted. You just came back from India. You're completely exhausted. You can't do your practice. You can just sit and listen to beautiful music. That's good. But as soon as you get back to yourself and you build your stamina again and you feel better and you have more energy, start practicing the sound. So that's crucial.
Right. And that using the breath, the voice, movement, these are things that you are doing, you are engaging in and activating, perhaps rather than any instrument outside of you. In a lot of these sound healing modalities, we're striking a bowl or whatever it might be, but you're literally engaging, and it's coming from you.
Yeah.
So I wonder, what's your hope for this program, and what do you want people to take away from the upcoming program?
Well, I hope that people will sign up for all 7, I think there's 6 or 7 modules, maybe 6 modules or 7 modules. I can't remember, but there are different sections, and some people can sign up just for one module and then take the second module if they wish. Some people may take the whole thing. I would wish for as many people to take as many modules as they can and to complete the full program, which is a year and a half long. But it can be done in 7 weeks modules, as I said. And since all the modules are going to be recorded, some people who can take only one module could later on get the video version of the module that they didn't take and slowly experience the whole program. Because the whole program, and this is my ultimate hope, that people will take the full program sooner or later, whenever they can. That would be life transforming. And not just for the person, it will transform their life because they will have sound tools to use by themselves whenever they need, every morning, every afternoon, once a week, once a month, every other day, whenever they want. They could use it to purify their heart, to lower anxiety, to increase immune system, to improve their energetic state. And that will improve the life of the people around them. Imagine if one person, and this is a true story. One of my students shared that she had a horrible neighbor, like really the most annoying neighbor, and they would fight all the time. They would have conflict. And she took my course, and she started realizing that the way she's reacting to the neighbor has been not making it better, but making it worse. And she starts slowly changing her energy with the sound tools that she learned with me. And then she starts relating to that neighbor in a different way. And slowly but surely, the edginess of the neighbor starts taming off. It changed the way the neighbor was behaving. It changes the way, one of my students wrote to me after one class that after one class, one of the courses during the week, I don't know, a tree fell on her car. it was in the winter, a tree fell, crushed her car, and she was shocked. She came out of her house and she saw her car completely ruined. And it completely broke her down. She didn't know what she gonna do. She felt it's the worst thing in the world. And then suddenly she remembered our class. She remembered the sound practices, and she remembered about yearning for the one of all things. And she did the practice, and suddenly she got the perspective that it's not the end of the world, that she's alive, that yes, it's a disaster, that the car is no longer there, and she will find a way to get another car. But she suddenly stood on her feet and felt completely different than she would have. So people have so many little miracles because of this educational program with sound, with healing sound. So I hope that as many people would sign in. It doesn't matter what their faith, it doesn't matter what their path, it doesn't matter if they have any experience in music. They don't need to be musicians, they don't need to be singers. It's really for any person who has breath. If you have breath, you can do it.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that and those stories about your students, because right, once you've embodied the practice, it's there when you need it. You have access to
Right.
it in those types of situations,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I remember another thing come to mind. One of the students was in the hospital, outpatient, and it was a very difficult day and I think she went to the elevator and she just felt terrible, the difficult situation medically, health wise, and she had to deal with not very nice staff in the hospital and all that. She went to the elevator to go to do an X-ray, and in the elevator suddenly she thought about the practice, and she did it just going down the elevator, one floor. I mean, 10 seconds. She came out of the elevator and she felt completely different. And the whole day changed. She just felt protected. She felt like nothing can touch her. She was doing better suddenly. And it affected everything around her. Suddenly the people around her were not so mean. The people around her were not so impatient. Something in her changed, and then she realized that she's affecting the environment, and that was in the hospital. There's so many stories, there's so many emails that I get, and I cherish those emails. I keep them, and I answer to every email that I receive. But I receive thousands and thousands of emails, stories of how it affected, how people affected. I mean, there's one of my students, her husband is bipolar, and now he was diagnosed in dementia, and she is a musician, and she's taking care of him, and she took care of him all their life. And I don't know, he's in his 70s, and he was very difficult, bipolar, all her life. She took care of him when he, went on his difficult side, and then he would be really, really nice and sweet, and he has this problem. And now he's going he suffers from dementia, so it started to be more difficult for her. And she's like a saint, and she's one of my students, and she needs a lot of strength, and she needs a lot of resources to stand through this challenge. She does, and she's doing really well. She continued to compose. She's a piano teacher. She teaches piano and she composes. And she also now started having, after she studied with me, she started having a weekly circle for her friends of sacred healing sounds that she's now teaching to her friends. They come to her house, to her studio once a week. It's really beautiful. So she's a source of light for the whole community. And it's not a secret that she studied with me, but in a way, this is her secret tools she's using. And she writes to me, there was a lady came to the class and she just lost her sister. And so my student who's leading the circle taught her one of the early Christian Maronite prayers for grief, for dealing with grief and connecting with loss, connecting with the spirit of a beloved who suffered and no longer here. And she taught that to that lady who came, who just lost her sister, and it was tremendously successful for helping that woman. So what I see is that I just put a seed, and I didn't invent that. I learned it from the elders. I'm benefiting from the ancestors and the elders that shared it with me and my research. And then I shared this seed, and my students are putting that seed in other souls, and other souls putting it in other souls. And what I see is a beautiful, ever expanding beauty. It just keep expanding. And it's just so beautiful. So that's my hope, and it's based on the reality. It's based on what I see going on. So all I hope for is that people show up. That's the only hope that I have, because from my experience, I know if people show up, there will be ever expanding beauty. If people show up, there will be beauty, they're going to be healing, they're going to be harmony, they're going to be unity, they're going to be better well-being experience for everybody. So I'm grateful that you and the University of Sufism are helping in spreading the word and bringing people together. So that's all we need. We just need human beings to show up.
Right. Yeah, that's beautiful. And I hope that's the case. I hope that's the case because that ripple effect that you're describing can just keep going and expanding. Well,
Yeah.
why don't you leave us with, with all your studies, all your work, whether it's film or these traditions, what are you curious about right now? What really has your interest? Maybe it's something new, maybe it's something you're diving deeper into.
I'm working right now on a very interesting project based on medicinal plants. And what I managed to do is using a device that plugs into the leaves and the stem of the plant, I managed to harvest the bioelectrical vibrations that comes out of plants. Now, while other people that I've seen are plugging this device to a synthesizer and they program the synthesizer to do all kinds of cool things like boom, 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 but really the signal from the plant just go to the synthesizer, and the synthesizer does the thing that the humans program the synthesizer to do. So it's not really one-to-one from the plant. It's not really authentic, in my opinion. So what I'm really interested in those bioelectrical signals, the vibrations inside medicinal plants. What is the energy that, let's say turmeric, if turmeric have been shown in scientific studies that turmeric lower cancer rates, the turmeric together with black pepper and olive oil increase the performance enhance the immune system, but it's the turmeric. What is in that formula? The turmeric, the black pepper, the olive oil. If I can get the energy, the vibrations from the inside that plant, maybe we could create music that transfer that vibration, that energy to the listener in order to benefit from the medicinal impact of those plants and so to benefit human beings. So that is a project that I'm very, very deep into, and I'm really fascinated by it. And so I'm working on it now, and I hope that in the coming year, I hope to be able to share it and to have it available for people. And maybe we could do another interview or another talk about that when it's ready, because it's really this is uh, the most fascinating project I'm working on right now, and I'm really really curious about how it's going to come out.
Yeah, I was going to say that's fascinating, and we will have to connect once you've really
Yeah.
immersed yourself in that and are ready to share. Well, thank you. This has been really
Pleasure.
illuminating, and I know this will be very enjoyed by a lot of people. So thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Natalie. I'll be
Yeah.
in touch. Okay.
Okay.
You
Bye
well.
bye. You too. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Sounds Heal Podcast, sponsored by the Om Shop and Spa. You can keep up to date with what's coming up next at soundshealstudio.com, on Instagram, Natalie Brown Sounds Heal, on Facebook, Sounds Heal Studio, and listen to meditations, music, and podcasts on the YouTube channel, Sounds Heal Studio. Thanks again for listening and for your support. Be well and stay tuned.